Hi, I'm Brian Taggart, one of the directors of Oceans Unmanned, here to talk to you about what we're doing with drones, whether it's ocean cleanup, mapping seals, chasing whales, doing some breath sampling. We're going to cover it all here in the next hour.
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm Matt Pickett. I'm co-founder of Oceans Unmanned, a nonprofit that uses drones for environmental research and monitoring. Today we'll be telling some stories about how we use this technology for a variety of environmental research and monitoring, so stay tuned, it's going to be fun.
Hi everyone, I'm Greg from Pilot Institute. We train drone pilots all over the country.
Hi, my name is Haye from DroneXL, where we cover all the drone news on our website.
Welcome to the latest episode of the PiXL Drone Show, our weekly podcast where we talk to industry professionals about what they do in the UAS space.
From professionals who use drone to fly inspection missions to public safety users or even drone light shows, you will learn on the PiXL Drone Show that drones are much more than just toys. Feel like we're in couple therapy sometimes, Greg. I don't know.
Well, that's a great way to start the episode right here. What do you want to talk about today?
These forced conversations, and then like all of a sudden we have to be chill and casual, and then chit chat. I don't know. It's all good. I'm looking forward to talking to Oceans Unmanned. I've run into them a couple of times, like many times over the last few years. I think what they're doing with drones is cool. It benefits the world. It helps with research, and what I particularly like is how they use drones in ways that drones were not designed to be used. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a different. I mean, last week we talked about doing inspections inside of nuclear power plants and coal inspection. This was pretty unique. And I mean, this is, again, very unique this week. So I think I love these different guests that we bring on because, you know, we always think about drones as being used for doing photography, videography, and that's really it. But there's so much more to it. So are you excited about going to Vegas?
Yeah, DJI Airworks, starting on Monday, Tuesday, and finishing up on Wednesday. So I'll be arriving on Sunday afternoon. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it. In the past, those events were great. And the last 2 years, we haven't had them. I mean, they did, but it was all online. And I think most of you will probably agree that online is not the same as face-to-face. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it. And it will be the first time that you and I actually get to meet each other.
I know, this is kind of funny. You know, if people have been watching us for a while, we've known each other since the beginning of the pandemic and never got a chance to basically meet in person. So I'm kind of excited about that. We're long overdue. And then you're going to come back through Prescott, right?
Yeah, so I booked my flight into Vegas and leaving from Phoenix. So I'll be driving with you, if that's okay, to Prescott. And then I have to figure out how to get to Phoenix and then fly back home again on Friday.
We should do a 4.5-hour podcast in the car as we drive back.
Drones and coffee.
Drones and coffee and driving on autopilot. No, I'm excited. I think this is going to be cool. We can do, we'll do something for, as you guys are listening, we'll do a little episode in the studio as we're in the same room. I think that's going to really help to get some discussion. Maybe just the two of us talking about drones in the industry in general. I think that would be fun. So,
yeah, and maybe we can make it into an Airworks special as well, where we kind of cover the event and see what cool stuff we run into there. Because I remember a couple of years ago, I think they had somebody from Snotbot. They either showed the promo video or they had somebody at the event talking about how they use the Inspire to do that. So I'm sure we're going to run into people there that use drones in cool ways, and we'll do our best to get them on the PiXL Show.
I'm excited. All right, well, let's bring the guests in and let's start grilling them.
Welcome to the PiXL Drone Show. Today we have Brian Taggart and Matt Pickett from Oceans Unmanned on the show. And you might have heard about them in the past. A couple of years ago, they used a Inspire as a Snotbot to scoop up the spray that comes from whales to be able to analyze it. And that's definitely one of the things we'll be talking about. Welcome to the show, guys. And maybe you can start with a quick introduction. Brian, you want to kick it off?
Let's let Matt kick it off.
Thanks for having us, guys. I'm Matt Pickett, President and CEO of Oceans Unmanned, a nonprofit that we'll talk about today. I was a NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, manned aircraft pilot for 20 years, doing environmental research and monitoring for manned aircraft. Everything from polar bear research in the Arctic to manatee surveys down in Florida to LiDAR high-resolution mapping of coastlines. and retired from that job about 10 years ago, just as NOAA was getting into unmanned aircraft systems or drones. And they asked me to go on contract to do some work with them to try to figure out how we could use drones to kind of supplement or replace the research we were doing in manned aircraft. So as I was working on contract for NOAA, a lot of other entities kept contacting me asking, can you help us figure out, can we use drones for environmental research and monitoring? And kind of realized there was an opportunity there to kind of help these entities, research organizations, kind of adapt unmanned technologies for their use. Bryant was just retiring from NOAA at that time, and so we joined forces together to launch Oceans Unmanned, which is a nonprofit dedicated to facilitating the use of unmanned technologies for environmental research and monitoring, kind of focused on the coastal and marine environment. And I'll turn it over to Brian for his intro.
Yeah, thanks, guys. My name is Brian Taggart. I was also a manned aircraft pilot for NOAA for 20 plus years, and Matt and I flew Twin Otters together. We flew a Citation together. I also flew the P3s. That's our NOAA's severe weather aircraft, hurricanes, thunderstorms, things like that.
Wow. And
I ran the aircraft operations center toward the end of my career, right when they were getting into drones, and they were using like shipboard launched drones, military hand-me-downs that Matt touched on, and to just do basic like a SEAL survey in the Arctic. And it was still a challenge just because there was no rules back in 2010 around there, and getting FAA clearance, understanding what you're even doing with a drone was a real challenge 10 years ago when they started dabbling in it. And then I retired, and like Matt said, we kind of kicked around a few things. He let me tag along on some projects. Pretty soon we kind of carved out a little niche with a nonprofit, Oceans Unmanned, and formed in 2016. And so going strong ever since. We keep pretty busy with doing a variety of things around the world, I'll say.
I do want to talk more about your experience with the manned aircraft world versus the unmanned. What are the things that you find are easier to do now? And then what are the things that the drones just still can't do at the moment that a manned aircraft can do?
You want to go first, Brian? Or?
Yeah, I'm just trying to go ahead. I'll frame my.
Okay, so I think what drones are very good at is being very inexpensive. And I'm kind of talking about biological research, right? So they're very inexpensive and can really target and give you high resolution imagery and information from a very small geographic area. So if you have a small geographic targeted area, a specific beach that you want to monitor, as Brian mentioned, for seal populations or marine debris or whatever the issue is, if it's a relatively small geographic area, then drones can really, replace what we used to do in manned aircraft, because we had to fly higher and, so you didn't get the good resolution that we can get on low flying drones. Where drones still kind of are falling short, but the potential is there, is for these large geographic areas. Blue water surveys, when you're surveying for blue whales, trying to do distribution and abundance, and you have to cover hundreds of square miles, flying beyond visual line of sight for that duration. The military has that technology. It's not cost effective now for environmental researchers to kind of utilize that technology. And then, of course, the other issue is, the human eye is very powerful. Brian and I both spent, years flying over open ocean with trained biological observers looking out the windows, counting whales or dolphins or seals or whatever they were studying. And the human eye is very powerful at seeing that anomaly. Oh, there's something different in that sea of blue. And drones and AI and machine learning are getting there. And again, DoD military has this technology, I'm sure. But to get it down into the user level for researchers, it is the next big step. And we can talk about that later. We're working on what's called AI on the edge, where you embed that machine learning in the drone itself to help recognize those anomalies. That's coming, and that's what we're really excited about. is those two things are still kind of the challenges to meet what we used to do in manned aircraft. So, Brian, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, a couple things. Everything we're doing with drones now, we're doing on a lot smaller scale. Things we did with manned aircraft, whether it's mapping coastline, whether it's counting seals, counting whales, and everybody kind of thinks that a drone's the answer. Just it's cheaper, but in the United States, the beyond visual line of sight issue is really, really restrictive. We were contacted a week before Ian went ashore and said, "What kind of drone capability can you provide?" I'm like, yeah, we lived through Andrew in '92. It was just as devastating. It was a Cat 5 went ashore where we were living, and you can't access it. I'm like, you can't access drones are localized. You can't access these disaster areas with a team of people. There's no support. There's no power just to map these local areas. So we developed a program back in the 2006 to fly post-hurricane damage imagery with an aircraft, because you can leave out of Texas and fly Florida and return to Texas and everything's normal and put it online and people see. So they're trying to do that locally. But again, the challenge with drones is you need people. You need to be on the ground. You need to be within a mile of what you're shooting because of the rules that we're currently under without a waiver, and you can't get that real time. So I'll leave it at that.
I'm excited to have you guys on the show, because you're using drones in so very different ways than what most normal people use them for, and also in conditions that are very much more demanding. So it's very cool to listen to what you guys have to say about all that. However, I do want to go back in time a little bit. The first time I came across Oceans Unmanned was when I learned about the Snotbot. And for all the people that are listening on the show, maybe either one of you can explain what the Snotbot was all about.
We can't take credit for the original Snotbot. That was a group out of Cape Cod, and they were the kind of innovators of that. And we've kind of piggybacked off of them for doing some work with killer whales in Puget Sound, trying to get breath samples of killer whales. And Brian, you want to talk about that project a little bit? And basically, we're supporting researchers who want to get DNA samples from these species. So, Brian.
Yeah, sure. It's the National Fisheries Group out of Alaska, but they're based in Seattle. So they take a small boat, and the original plan was to put essentially a petri dish on the bottom of it was a Mavic. So we put on just a Mavic Pro petri dish hanging off the bottom of it, chasing whales, killer whales, as they're in the Puget Sound, and then flying 10 feet off the deck and trying to time their exhalation and collect it in the petri dish, land, seal it up, put another petri dish, and keep going. And it's for health assessments, and it's a real challenge. We've done a lot of whale work in our years, and it's a real challenge to fly 10 to 15 feet, quarter mile away from your small boat, chasing a whale, trying to get a breath sample. And so they recently, just this year, they used a M30 to do the same thing off the deck of a small boat. Kind of hinged a petri dish down below because they found a lot of the prop wash was degrading their samples. So they wanted to hang essentially a petri dish maybe 2 feet below an M30, and then they can fly a little higher, and because it was a real challenge for the pilots to fly in those kind of conditions, as you can imagine.
So one thing I will say about that it's not as sexy as the Snotbot, but what we've found over the years is what drones are really hopeful for in whale research is to help taggers find the whales to tag, because when the researchers are out there on a small boat and the whale comes up, they see the whale and they try to speed up and attach a suction cup satellite tag. And when we give them drones, eye in the sky, then we can see those whales before they do and can direct them like, hey, you need to come a couple hundred yards. He's going to surface in 1, 2, 3. And, we can increase their efficiency for putting tags on, and from, 5 in a good day to 15 or 20 easily by just providing that eye in the sky. And then the other thing we do to support kind of whale research is our free fly program, where we train whale response entanglement teams how to use drones to help them get kind of information about how that whale is entangled before they go out and try to disentangle that whale.
Yeah. Not too long ago, I saw even videos where those GPS tagging devices were actually dropped by the drone, and then they would just miraculously fall right on the right spot almost, and with suction cups, I guess, attach themselves, and it was a done deal.
Yeah, that I was surprised they had success with that, and I don't know how many takes they had to get that one beautiful video of it working, but I mean, that's a game changer too in that field if they can do that reliably and consistently.
It must be hard though, right? I mean, being out on the ocean, waves, swell, I mean, everything moves. The whales, they move, the drone moves. I mean, that must be quite a challenge to do, I would imagine.
Yeah, we spent a lot of our early years, because there was a lot of demand, obviously, working in the marine and coastal environment, to figuring out how to safely launch and recover drones off of ships and small boats. And so we developed a whole training scenario and protocols and put a lot of time and effort in evaluating every new platform that kind of comes out. It's like, okay, is this possible to work off a vessel? Because some of the early drones couldn't even initialize if you weren't, on the beach. And so there were some early challenges, but there's a lot of products out there now that kind of meet those challenges. And we've developed the techniques to repeatedly launch and recover, safely, and provide training for a lot of groups. So.
I know a few stories where drones returned to home, and home was not where the boat was anymore. So that happened. During sailboat races. Oh, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
There's definitely challenges on the open water with everything you mentioned. And again, these small drones we're using with a battery life of 20 minutes, you have a useful life of 10 to 12 before you better start heading back. And without experienced drone operators, like I think we all are, it's a challenge for somebody who's inexperienced or just wanting to get into it to put all those pieces together under the pressure and get that thing safely on deck. And mostly we hand launch and recover just because it's easier than trying to find a deck space to put a drone down on.
Some of the perhaps most daring and then challenging things I've seen with hand-catching drones were when they tried to record those open ocean sailboat races. And they would launch drones in like 20, 30 miles an hour wind. And they always seem to use the Phantom 4 because you had the landing gear that you could grab. Is that for that reason one of your favorite drones as well? Because it must be a lot harder to catch a Matrice or even a Mavic, right?
Yeah, the Phantom 4 is such a reliable workhorse, and having that landing gear down there to give you some room for your hands is really helpful. And one of the other tricks we've learned is we actually use NFL wide receiver gloves, and we played around in the early days with all sorts of heavier leather gloves and thinner gloves. And I was like, NFL receivers, they use these gloves. I'm going to order a pair. And so I ordered a pair, and they offer medium protection, but they're super tacky. And even when they're wet, they're still very tacky. And so I ordered them. I'm like, these are great. And my son put them on, and he was having me throw the football to them and doing all these one-handed catches. And it's like, no wonder why these NFL receivers can do these amazing catches, because the ball gets anywhere near your hand and it sticks to it. And so that's what we use now is NFL wide receiver gloves. They're expensive, $30 or $40 a pair or something like that. But they're, like I said, you won't lose it. As soon as your fingertips touch the landing gear or the body of the drone, you got good control of it. And it has enough, protection against plastic props, maybe not against carbon fiber, but enough to give you some sense of, I'm not going to get cut up too bad if this goes sideways. So.
We routinely catch the Mavic, the Phantom, the Matrice 210, and the Trinity F90 Plus, routinely hand launch and recover those. Those are our main 4 that we use for hand launch and recover.
So when you look at a drone, what are the specs that you guys are interested in? We see people being interested in obviously battery flight time. And is there any specs out there that you really need to have in order to do what you do?
Well, obviously, duration is one of the big drivers, as Brian mentioned, because when we're flying over water all the time, we have a rule, hard and fast rule, feet dry at 30% battery. That means we're over the boat or back over the beach at 30%. So when you're leaving 30% in reserve, that really cuts into that 15, 20 minute flight time. So I think battery duration, and that's why we're really excited about the VTOL system. Brian mentioned we're flying the Trinity, the quantum system Trinity F90, and we're getting, an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes out of that thing reliably. And we're actually pushing the limits of beyond visual line of sight because we stay in the middle of an area and we go a mile each direction and we still got flight time left in the bag. And so we're trying to figure out how to get that or a similar system launched off a ship because we think that's, for bigger ships, that's the solution once those, the military again has that technology for expensive VTOLs, but these commercial operators that or manufacturers are just getting into that market. We think that's going to be the solution. In the early days of us playing with drones, I wasn't even the biggest driver for a lot of the research we were doing was user interface. And, a lot of the early systems, Brian mentioned the military hand-me-down systems we were playing with NOAA were super complex. And it was like a 2-week, training session to learn how to fly this thing. And, we wanted to empower the researchers to be able to fly themselves, not hire, some engineer who had 2 weeks of training or ex-military guys. And so the early push for us was that user interface. And then when Drone Deploy came along, and we're big fans of Drone Deploy, to really simplify that interface for mapping, right? And now user interface across the board, a lot of these systems are very user friendly. And so now I think we can go back to, champion flight time as, our biggest desire, I guess.
I'll say any platform also that has swappable payloads like the quantum systems. We use their LiDAR. We use their one of their 2 cameras. We use the hyperspectral, the multispectral, and to be able to land, swap a payload, and then get back and map the same area. It's great. Our dual payload on an M210 or the new M30 with built-in RGB and the FLIR system. We've done a lot of work with we put a FLIR on a Phantom 4 and worked all day, to do some spotting some birds, just looking for the infrared signature in the treetops, But if they integrate the camera for us, that's easier. But that's a real important aspect of payloads.
So follow up on the payloads. You mentioned a few different payloads. What do you use each for? The thermal might be obvious, but what's the other payloads that you use and why?
RGB or regular cameras just for, creating visual maps and looking for species. And you can do photogrammetric measurements on, size and weight now with, the structure from motion. So you can get, health of animals as well with the RGB. We use the topographic LiDAR Brian mentioned for a lot of, terrain modeling and mapping and sea level rise and floodplain mapping. And we're working with NOAA fisheries on salmon habitat along river corridors to kind of get the terrain of the coastline or the river's edges. So that's what we use the topographic LiDAR for. The multi-spec gets into, kind of habitat mapping and habitat classification. You can distinguish different kinds of vegetation or plant cover, plant health with the multi-spec. And so that's more for habitat classification. Though we're playing around with the multi-spec with some biological stuff with surface fish schools, sardines and anchovy fish schools, looking at the multi-spec to see if you can do species identification with the multi-spec flying from the 210. And then some stuff with seals on the beach looking at the multi-spec too. As regarding infrared or thermal, when we first started flying that as a few years ago, as Brian mentioned, we kind of hacked a Phantom 4 and hung a FLIR off it. We really thought, man, this is just the ticket because, these species that are, kind of cryptic are very good at hiding or blending into their environment. If you can spot them on FLIR, man, that's really a game changer. The problem was it's a lot of art and not necessarily full science, because, it's looking at the temperature difference from its surrounding environment. And so, we were down in Mexico working on Guadalupe fur seals that were hauled out on these rocks. And if the rocks were wet and the seals were dry, they popped great on the thermal, right? They looked fantastic. But if the seal just came out of the water and they're wet, the rock's wet, and they're the same temperature, they're really hard. Same with the seabird surveys we were doing that Brian mentioned in Oregon. We got a lot of false positives where the sunlight would, heat up a section of branch, and all of a sudden that would glow really, really brightly. And so there's some utility in kind of distinguishing with the FLIR for biological stuff, but there is a lot more art to it, and conditions have to be really perfect for it to help. And so Brian mentioned we like to fly the dual payloads, where we can kind of combine, infuse the two data sets of the RGB and the thermal and infrared, and kind of like, okay, which one will help us? And they kind of complement each other sometimes. Brian, do you want to add to that?
Cool.
Yeah, we were doing a marbled mirrorlet project in Oregon, and we're searching for a bird on a nest 180 feet straight up in the tree. So it's in the middle of the woods. It's a real challenge. So it took two of us with two different screens. Matt's looking at the infrared. I'm visually trying to fly, looking up, just avoiding everything. And it gets back down to battery life too. Now we're hauling a little extra. We're pushing a Phantom 4. And what do you have? 8, 10, 12 minutes, to get up, search a tree for a bird, get back down, swap the battery out, and do it again. It was a real challenge just because of the environment. Try not to, one of the things we haven't mentioned yet when you're flying around wildlife is disturbing the wildlife, and drones at a certain level, at a certain altitude, at a certain pitch will disturb wildlife. And as operators, we're super aware of that, and really you're not allowed to disturb wildlife. And we go in high. We tried a lot of different things not to, but if we do, it's kind of game over. You can't go around trying to count seabirds and while you're flushing seabirds, type of deal.
Yeah.
So there's a trade-off of where that line is.
Now, earlier in our conversation, you mentioned flying beyond visual line of sight, BVLOS. If you do ocean research, how far do you have to get away from shore that the FAA drone regulations no longer apply? I mean, they cover the national airspace. Do you have to get outside of territorial waters in order to be free of their rules and fly your drones as far as you want? Or
I think that is the answer. And within, I think, territorial 12 miles, and we either do work within a mile or two of the shore, or we do work halfway to Hawaii from California. We've been working out there all summer, and I even called the FAA going, the flight information region out there. I'm like, where does your surface start? And I go, we're going to be flying a drone at 400 feet, 10 miles from the ship. Is there any issues? She said, no, have a nice day. And so we check the boxes just to make sure that, try to learn, make sure we're legal. But we don't have too much work more than a couple miles offshore. And that's still FAA.
It's interesting, right? I mean, the drone rules are one set of rules for everybody, basically. I mean, talking about people that fly drones professionally. However, if you start looking closer into how people actually use drones, it's very different. Whether we're talking about a large, let's say, Amazon drone flying over an urban area, or you guys being out in the ocean with hardly anybody around. And I can imagine if you're going to fixed wing drones and your flight duration and the range in which you can operate extends so much. I can see how being able to fly beyond visual line of sight would be a game changer for you.
Yeah, back in the project Brian was talking about in Oregon, we were flying below the canopy of the old growth forest, which was 300 feet. And we had to get an FAA waiver. This was before Part 107. And we're like, we're flying at 150 feet underneath the old growth forest of 300 feet. if there's traffic here, they got bigger problems than our little Phantom 4 flying around, because they've had to go through a lot of trees to get down to where we're flying. So I'm not sure that's a big concern. And it's the same thing out in Hawaii a few years ago, where we wanted to fly some projects out at Midway, and they're like, we can't let you fly beyond visual line of sight. And I'm like, man, if an airplane's here that we don't know about, that's not scheduled, they got bigger problems than our drones. But, people talk about 107 and the challenges now. And, since we've been in this game for at least 10 years, it's gotten a lot better. I mean, 107 has definitely made it so much easier. And I understand people are still frustrated, but it's definitely got a lot better. We used to joke that, the amount of paperwork we had to do to fly weighed a lot more than the drones we were flying, because it was really challenging back in the early days to fly.
Yeah.
And with the FAA land system around airports, it's just getting easier and easier. You can fly closer. Still, a lot of people are hung up on, I can't fly because I'm near an airport. Like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. So,
yeah,
we do.
Yeah, it took me. I remember when Lance was coming around, and I had requested approval to fly in the Class D airspace around my airport, and it took 11 months to get the approval before Lance. And then all of a sudden, the next day, you're like, okay, wow, now we can get this in seconds, and that's life changing when you've used something else before, and all of a sudden this comes to be. It's a major change. Now, my question is, Haya said the BV loss obviously is a limitation for you right now. What are the other FAA regulations that you wish you could be either exempt from or you didn't have in place that would make your life a lot easier?
Well, I mean, I don't think BV loss is necessarily a hurdle for us, just because of the requests we have are kind of localized so far. And again, when we do beyond visual line of sight, it's out in the middle of the Pacific, and we can do whatever we want. I think, as the cameras get better, the desire to fly above 400 feet, and I know that's relatively easily waivered. And so I don't think there's any hurdles that are not waiverable right now for us, that if we had the requirement and the client or a partner wanted to do it, we would, be able to get it done. But like I said, the 42 megapixel cameras now that we're flying them at 400 feet, it's almost overkill for the resolution that we need. And we'd like to be able to, fly at 700 or 800 feet, and cover larger areas. But then again, you can't cover large areas unless you get the BV loss waiver. So, I think the FAA is heading in the right direction, and maybe just I like having have to go through these waivers to ensure that people are doing the right thing. So maybe simplify the waivers a little bit, but I like the fact that you have to get a waiver to do some of the things that are out of the ordinary.
Mm-hmm. So when you guys count dolphins or whales, like is it literally like an ordinary mapping mission almost, where you send a drone up in the air, you map a part of the ocean, and then based on the photos, once they're all stitched together, you can actually count all the different whales that you see?
Yes, that's the concept, and it works a lot better, for haul outs on the beach than open water. Some of the stuff we're doing with the ocean cleanup for marine debris, those aren't moving like whales or dolphins are, the marine debris, or at least not as quickly. And so we basically do a mapping mission, but with 0% overlap. On the land, you're doing 70% overlap, so you can get that good 3D model. But out in the ocean, you want to not double count things. And so the way the machine learning, the AI does, is you want basically each footprint not overlapping. And so it's different depending on what you're trying to do out there. But yes, that's the main goal, is primary, just to paint either the ocean or the coastline that you're looking at, to create high scale, large area photo mosaic that you can do then the counts or body measurements.
But if you have a set of photos, and let's say you can count 20 dolphins that are swimming there, does that mean that the group of dolphins is only 20, or are there potentially dolphins swimming at deeper in the water that you can't really see with a camera? So
that's the magic of biological statistics, right? They've been doing this same thing as for, like I said, for manned aircraft. There's all sorts of different statistical analysis of how they estimate what percentage, depending on the species, they see in given time. There's something called mark recapture, where we used to go up and fly polar bears, where they would shoot the polar bears with a paint gun. So they have a certain number of polar bears had paint on them. And then when we do surveys, we saw 3 that were painted and 7 that were not painted. They could do statistical magic and say, okay, that population is this much. And so, yes, it's basically statistics that go into biological monitoring for when you're doing these distribution and abundance surveys for biological monitoring.
And drones are probably not the best tool to do large areas of water to try to count, I'll say, whales or dolphins. I know we're working with a group right now doing that has the vision to map the Monterey Bay from shore, going out of the Trinity, just doing transects, and then kind of getting a snapshot of what's in the bay at any given time. Matt mentioned the ocean cleanup group, where we've been using an Arameo Talon, amphibious Talon, so we hand launch it off the deck. It flies for an hour plus, takes plenty of photos, 0 end laps, 0 side laps, stitch them all together, and then count ocean plastics. It lands in the water, put a small boat in the water, recover it, bring it aboard, pull out the SD card, rinse it off, and put a new battery in and throw it back in the air and map as much as you can. And we had some good success, some mapping marine debris with that drone.
I want to touch up on the hurricanes. You guys said that you were in a hurricane hunter and flying around inside and collecting data, which, by the way, is impressive. As a pilot myself, I've always been amazed that you guys can do that.
Right.
Do you see at one point that we can use drones to do something similar and maybe even take risks that you wouldn't be able to take? Or is this just not possible at the moment? I know there was a kind of a buoy type of drone that goes in the water to measure the wave size and everything. Where do you see the future using drones to help with hurricanes?
They just successfully launched a drone out of the P3 into Ian last week, and they've been working on it for 10 years, and it's kind of baby steps, but we would launch sonobuoys out of the aircraft from the inside. It's about that big, and so they put the drone in. So they developed over the last 10 years a drone that fits in this cartridge. It shoots out, wings fly out, and the prop spins, and it can stay in the eye for hours. And so they're doing that, and that is the future, because as you know, getting into the hurricane is the challenge, and getting a small aircraft or drone into a hurricane is probably couldn't do it. It's pretty violent going in and out. But once you're in the eye, you drop that thing, and it monitors zero wind center. It monitors the movement. You have a real time plane for after you leave. You still have an instrument inside the storm, working all day, and they're expendable. They run out of fuel and they splash. And at this point in time, someday if you're near land, they might be able to recover it. But it's happening, and there's a group with the Hurricane Center that's making it happen, and it's just another tool. I've been in a hurricane, 6 planes stacked up, just all different levels, all doing their own thing. So you add a drone to it, and everybody's dropping sondes and collecting information. So it's just the UAVs are tools,
Well, NOAA did some work with the Global Hawk flying above the hurricanes too a few years ago, right, Brian?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Expensive.
So it's very expensive, I'm sure. It's not often that you get to talk to people that went inside hurricanes. So I have a follow-up question on that. This is unmanned, and this is not related to UAS, but what does it feel like to be inside that hurricane? Is there like a fear as you're flying? Obviously you're trained to do this kind of stuff, but I don't know how you can describe it, but I'm sure it's some experience.
Yeah, first of all, there's no fear. It's your job. It's your job to get those 10 scientists in and out. You have about 7 flight crew. The hurricane's anywhere from 200 miles across. The eye's anywhere from 10 miles to 50 miles. It's violent. It's thunderstorms. It's pretty violent. I mean, You're in a lot of water. It's a lot of shaking. Your job is to keep the wings level. I always say Mother Nature's going to take that plane away from you every once in a while, but she always gives it back in short little periods of like, hang on, boys. And it's the rain's hitting the windshield so hard you can't talk. It's just too loud. But then once you pop through the eye, and that's the cylinder of air that's rising up. So your throttles are in the bag. You point the nose down, and your airspeed is going like this. And so you get through it. You get in the eye. You put it all back together. Go make a sandwich. You have 15, 20 minutes to find zero wind center, and that's where they mark the eye, and then you punch out the other side and do it again for about 6 hours.
That's incredible.
Now, hang on. I mean, you guys are pilots, so you know what you're doing. You know what the plane is capable of. You understand weather perhaps better. On board, you also have scientists, right, who might not have flown in those kind of conditions. I mean, is everybody cool in that plane and like, oh, this is fun? Or
yeah, and there's a few media on there, and you're like, hey, the seatbelt light's on, because I always say, like, we're all adults. We're in an aircraft. We're in a hurricane. Let's be responsible. And if you need to get up and grab something, ask me, because I see what's coming and I know what's about to happen. So it's all cool. What's happening on the ground?
I'm tempted to ask you if I can join once, but I'm not quite sure if I should actually.
It's a cool thing. I've flown the eye of a hurricane over 200 times.
Wow. And you're still here and you're with us today. So it can't be that dangerous, I guess.
It's dangerous.
I know that sorry?
It's dangerous.
It is. I know in the last hurricane, Ian, I think they also had one of those sail drone drones, the ones that sail basically. Do you guys interchange information like NOAA, you guys, them? I mean, there might be other organizations involved in analyzing hurricanes. Like, do you share all the findings and best practices and learnings among each other, or how does that work?
Yeah, we train a lot of NOAA drone operators. And again, especially for our maritime operations, we partnered with NOAA to kind of develop the best practices for maritime operations of UAS. And we actually worked with them to get certain platforms approved for NOAA shipboard operations. So as far as sail drone, I visited with them a few years ago when they were just getting on the map and tried to work some projects with them, and also Liquid Robotics, their wave glider. So unmanned surface vehicles is something we're definitely interested in as well for environmental research and monitoring. Just haven't had the opportunity to find the perfect project for them. Although we're interested in conceptualizing some work with marine debris. It seems like there's a big push for using unmanned technology to kind of help identify and recover marine debris. And so we're looking at unmanned surface vehicles for that requirement as well.
And another thing we just recently used that you don't have probably much experience with is a tethered drone. We took a tethered drone offshore for 3 weeks off of one of the ocean cleanup boats, a Mavic, using the Valarius system, and 150 feet, 2 hours, no problem, just cranking away, looking at the trash entering one of the capture nets, and we're looking at the new Valarius tether drone system with an M30, which has a 300-foot tether to put a little higher eye in the sky to look around the horizon to spot the ghost nets, to make a little better decision to tag them. We're working with another group for ocean cleanup, and so that's the first time we've dabbled with tethered drones, but we had some good success. There are some challenges, but anytime you go offshore and you're underway and use an app, a follow me app, the drone actually followed the ship and as we were underway and flew for hours.
Wow. How do you guys get your funding? Obviously, you're a non-for-profit. How does this work? What's your main funding source?
We write a lot of grants and have some success with grants, but what we've kind of discovered over probably the past year and a half, 2 years is kind of word of mouth. People like, hey, how did you do that? And like, well, contact these guys. This group will help you out. And so basically it's just contracts that entities kind of want to do a certain thing. And what's interesting about our business model, if you call it a business model, is we're kind of almost constantly trying to put ourselves out of business for groups, because a certain research entity will reach out to us like, hey, we want to try to use drones to do this monitoring or this research. Can we do it? So they hire us. We go out there and like, okay, let's try this. If this works, great. Here's the platform you need. Here's the payloads you need. Here's all the paperwork you need. We can train your people, and we'll develop the capacity in-house in your agency or your group so you can do this yourself. 70% of the time, that's what happens. They're like, yeah, we can do this. And we're excited about doing it. 30% of the time, the groups are like, you know what, I have a real job and I don't want to learn how to fly drones, and it's too much. I don't want to do firmware updates and I don't want to do paperwork for the FAA. And so can you guys come back once a year and collect this data for us? So it's a mix of, us trying to build capacity in these entities versus them hiring us to come back and just deliver the data once or twice a year or whatever it is. So it's kind of a mix. But the good thing about that is they're always doing something new. As Brian said, somebody asked us, hey, can you do tethered drones off a ship? And we're like, oh, well, let's try it and figure out if we can make it work. And it was very challenging to get to work. And now people have contacted us about like, hey, we're interested in a tethered drone for this requirement off a ship. And so all of a sudden word of mouth gets out there and people are like, yeah, that could solve our problems too. Can you help us? And some of those people will say, yeah, we'll buy the system and we'll train our guys and we'll do it ourselves. Others will basically say, hey, can you come do this for us once a year?
Yeah. Do drone manufacturers such as Autel or DJI, do they sponsor you guys? Like, do they provide drones for free or at a discounted price at least? Or
DJI has been very generous in the past. In the early days, about 5 or 7 years ago, they actually did a film with us, one of their DJI stories, and they donated some gears to our free fly program. Other groups are pretty generous about giving us discounts or demonstrations of because we're kind of like a unique use case for a lot of their systems, and they're like, yeah, we want to see if this can do this too. So manufacturers overall are pretty generous with their time, not necessarily donating gear, but maybe discounts and stuff like that. So yes, there are a lot of good companies out there that are generous.
That's good. Greg and I will be at DJI Airworks, which is like DJI's own convention next week. So we'll ask them if they can be generous again. I don't think that should be a thing of the past. I think that should be a thing of today and tomorrow. We did mention artificial intelligence a little earlier. I've seen over the last couple of years in Australia, there's a group that uses AI to identify dolphins, bodyboarders, surfers, and sharks. I know researchers have used AI to help them count penguins and seals. How do you guys see the future of artificial intelligence in combination with drones? Do you think there's like a huge opportunity there, or?
It's definitely part of the solution, because we map a lot. And a lot of times the scientists are forced to hand count. We map Muskegon Island off Nantucket once a year, 6,000 gray seals. And so traditionally it's been hand counted. And so AI is the future. So you can just run it through first of all, you have to teach it, which is a challenge, because you have to get the data sets which represents something. And we're currently using a lot of AI on with the ocean cleanup team, because, and that's a challenge. I think they say there's about maybe 20%, false returns because of just wave action, as opposed to a ghost net or a buoy floating. And so as you train your AI, it gets better. Anytime that you can take out the human element, you can scale it at that point. And there is a big opportunity. And I know there's a lot of there's some drone deployer, as Matt mentioned, we're real fans of, and they have some add-ons to their product that is machine learning and detection, auto detection. So it's great.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that beyond visual line of sight combined with AI will allow drones to do these larger scale blue water, research missions where they're out there for a long time. And because otherwise, if you go out there and shoot 6 hours of video over the ocean and somebody's got to come back and watch that video and identify, you might as well just have rented a plane and go out there and done it real time looking out the window. And so the machine learning or AI and the ability to, just even queue up, okay, out of that 6 hour video or 10,000 images, here's 100 you should look at, then that's a big time saver. And then you get into, the drones will, detect something through the AI and then circle around and collect very detailed imagery of whatever that anomaly is. And so then you get smart drones out there doing stuff like that, which is a game changer. And again, all this stuff is available at the DoD level. It's just a matter of it trickling down to be, feasible at the commercial level. And so those are going to be, huge game changers for the utility for research using drones.
And we're working with a group which is miniaturizing the computer AI component. So it's actually on the drone. So it sends back real-time data of what you're looking for, as opposed to post-processing this, especially in the marine debris world. So you can make a better decision. Should I steer the ship left? Should I steer the ship right to get more kilograms per mile, I'll say, of ocean trash? And so it's a real challenge to send back data real time, AI data real time back to the user. But that's something we're working on.
Yeah, and it can be as simple as yes or no, right? For each image, is there something in that image, yes or no? And that could be enough to, create a heat map, they call it, where there's a lot of concentrations of whatever it is, whether it's dolphins or whales or marine debris in this case. It doesn't have to be detailed analysis for that real time. It can be, there is something here, yes, 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 yes. And you have all these yeses over here and all these no's over here. It's like, okay, well, let's target whatever it is we're doing towards that group of yeses. Even if there's a lot of false positives and there's a few positives in there, you kind of get some kind of concept of where concentrations is of whatever it is you're looking for. So that's the basic level of what we're trying to get to now.
Yep. And I think that also applies for search and rescue. This kind of technology can be used for search and rescue, finding somebody in a large field or whatever it is. Do you lose drones often? I'm sure you try not to, but the reality of the job is
if we've flown it, we've crashed it. So, and well, I was going to say it's been a while, but it hasn't been a while. It's still happening. And it's because we push the limits of these systems, right? And we do things they were not really designed to do, whether it's hanging extra sensors on them, whether it's taking a tethered system that's made for the parking lot out on a ship that's pitching and rolling in 5-foot seas doing 3 knots, or even working off a ship, and you're combining. I tell everybody, aviation operations are challenging, marine operations are challenging, the weather is challenging. You combine all those three to try to fly drones off a ship. You're combining aviation and marine operations with the unpredictability of weather. You better be willing to, risk that equipment.
And one of the techniques to use before we'll fly a Trinity with a LiDAR unit. That's $100,000 rig. And so before we throw that into there, we'll launch a Mavic or a Phantom, put it at 400 feet, throw it in ADI mode and do a wind check. And so let us drift. And then we have a real-time wind read at altitude before we send up the real stuff and push limits, because a lot of times we're pushing weather. We're always pushing weather, whether it's winds and mostly it's winds, to try to get the job done, because you only have limited amount of days. Or if you're at sea, M210, it's fairly weatherproof. We've flown it in light rains, mist, and it's certified for that. And we've pushed it. it's interesting. They tell you not to, but you can, and we often do. So have we splashed things?
It's the only way to.
We splashed a few things.
It's the only way to learn, right? You got to push the envelope a little bit and see what happens next.
But I tell both my kids that I'm more nervous at times flying drones than I ever was flying manned aircraft, and they're like, well, "How can that be? You're risking your life and scientists in the back when you're flying." I'm like, because I have my hands on the controls and I can feel and feel like I can do something. I can hear changes. I have a direct physical connection to what I'm flying. And with a drone, as Brian said, the LiDAR cost $70,000, and we were flying hyperspectrals like $50,000 off of M600. And it's like, if my computer glitches, I have no control. I just sit there and watch it fall out of the sky, which we did with SenseFly EV one time. And you don't have direct control. You rely on computers and radio signals to keep your equipment safe, and how many times a day does your computer glitch or your phone glitch and you have to restart it. If that happens at a bad time, then it's game over, and you're kind of helpless in that situation. And I don't like that feeling compared to when I was back in the cockpit and had actually physical control.
Yeah, when you're in the cockpit, you're in control and you control everything basically. Whereas with the drone, you're at the mercy of electronics.
But with that said, there's great insurance companies out there, and they will insure you. And if something crashes, they write a check, and it's successful. So the bigger, the more expensive stuff you fly, you have to make that analysis whether you want to spend the money on insurance, because a lot of times, like the sensors are, you put a $10,000 sensor on a $1,500 Phantom, you got to make a decision because it's going to fall out of the sky someday. One little solder is going to come loose, or you're going to misjudge the battery, or it happens.
Yeah, I mean, at least the benefit there is that if you do lose the drone, it's you lose a product. There's no human life involved, hopefully, and the insurance will cover the expenses. And yeah, I mean, LiDAR is expensive, but if they cover it, then I guess we're still good. If you step back a little bit and look at the research world overall, do you feel that drones are being adopted and accepted the way they should, given all the things that they offer? Or do you feel that some parts of research are still reluctant or hesitant to start using drones?
I think they're being adapted at an amazing pace, and people continue to come up with creative ideas of how to use them. And there's college programs now that are targeted at teaching environmental researchers how to use drones. Duke Marine Lab has a fantastic program that they're doing. They're churning out talented college kids who understand how to use unmanned technologies for a variety of different research. And so I think with having that at the education level, getting this technology into the hands of students is really powerful. And actually, I think it's fantastic that, this technology has kind of inspired, kids who would have maybe gone into engineering or computer science, all of a sudden are like, I have these skills, but I can use it to help solve environmental problems. And that's, to me, really great to bring in not just pure biologists or environmental, students into that field. We're bringing, engineers and computer geeks and technicians into environmental research and monitoring. So we're getting this whole new cadre of talented people to address these environmental research and issues. So I'm really excited and really hopeful about that. So
those PlayStation skills of kids are going to finally pay off, right?
Yes,
those parents don't have to worry anymore.
Yeah.
So I think Greg is having some internet issues. He's trying to get back into the show. At the same time, we're exactly at 2:00. So we've been talking for an hour. Typically, towards the end of the show, we always end the show with one final question. What is your favorite drone to fly? If you don't have to fly for work, it's a Saturday, you got the whole day. Like, what is the drone you would take with you to just have fun flying?
I would go with the Mavic Mini just because it's so small and packable in a backpack. And I like the quadcopter style. So just for my personal use, I fly a Mavic Mini. I think it gets the job done.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And how about you,
Yes,
Brian?
I think that is probably true. I flew a Phantom and a Mavic yesterday, and the Mavic is just compact and gets the job done. You can't tell the difference from the end product, and so just because it's only good if you have it and can get it airborne, and it's small and compact, and that those new Mavics are so capable, 6 mile range with a great camera. So it's got to be, and we're such fans of DJI just because they make it easy, and it's a great product.
Yeah, my first drone was a Phantom 2, and you had to put a GoPro on it, and it was a big case, and my kids used to hate it because they're like, hey, let's stop here, and like I want to get some drone footage, and it took me 20 minutes to put it all together and get it airborne. And now Mavic, it just like pull it out of your pocket and throw it in the air and hook up your phone and you're good to go. And so they're much more patient with me now.
It's pretty phenomenal how far drones have come in the last decades. It's like you said, I mean, initially there was a lot of trial and error and then combining different products. And now you just get a DJI Mini and you're good to go, basically, for most cases. Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for being part of our show today. It was awesome to talk to you and to learn from your perspective, how drones are used and what they can do for the greater goods. I will also urge you to not retire anytime soon, because it sounds like your job is going to get a lot more interesting in the next couple of years as drones keep getting better. But again, thank you for joining, and we're looking forward to learning more of you going forward.
Thank you for the opportunity to chat, and we have a bunch of young, talented kids on our team now that can take the leadership of the next generation of technology comes online.
Thank you.
Awesome.